Thank you very much, John. Sure.
So I'll just a quick note to the presenters while Jeffrey's getting set up for the next talk. This computer that you see right here in front of you is our live stream. So if you're answering questions here, you're getting a very unflattering image of yourself.
Can I also ask people ask questions to be a bit louder so that people in the conference
Yeah,
can hear them?
people presenting, please repeat questions if possible. Are you connecting? That's what you get.
What I did prepare is now for something completely different. We usually talk a lot about religion in the LCS, and that's an extension of which rules from the United Nations, which stay relatively open and welcome to everyone thanks to being part of the no cross rule. But when religion itself has something to say about online gaming, then I think it becomes interesting for us. So I'll let Jeffrey start his presentation of what's the right language in Bahai.
Thank you. So, I just wanted to assure everyone, because in the content community, there's a resistance to what people call proselytizing for boxing. There won't be any of that. And also, there won't be any evangelizing for any religion. So I had sort of a double whammy against this spot. Well, I don't know. If you don't know me, my name is Jeffrey Brown, and I've been a member of the LCS for about LCC3, which I just missed. So, one of the things is that a lot of the early boxlings had religious motivation. The earliest one I know about is the Lingua Ignota. It was made by St. Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century. This was followed by the Ars Magna by Raymond Lull in the 13th to the 14th century. And then there's others like Kirchner, Delgarno, and Wilkins, all who created these philosophical languages. But they really had certain religious motivations behind them in their conception of what they were doing. And a lot of them were really sort of meant to be languages to missionary the world. And furthermore, even modern Hebrew had religious motivations behind its reconstruction, because that's, modern Hebrew is based on biblical Hebrew. But all of these were individual efforts. These people, partly through their religious beliefs, created oxlanes. But the Baha'i faith is unique in that its promise of the creation of a future global oxlane is scriptural. If you're a member of the Baha'i faith, this is something that is one of the principles of the faith, is that this will happen someday. And I don't think there's any other religion in the world that makes any statements about this. So this, I'm not going to talk about anything about the Baha'i faith. I'm not going to talk about any religious information. But I do, and if you do have questions about it, see me during the break. But I do need to talk a little bit about what happened historically and who said what. So these personages are the people who are the administrative heads of the Baha'i faith during different periods of time. First is the Bab, that means the gate in Arabic, followed by Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God in Arabic, followed by his son, Abdul-Baha, followed by Abdul-Baha's grandson, Shobi Effendi, and finally, we have the Universal House of Justice, which is elected every 5 years, and is currently the administrative head of the Baha'i faith. Now, I don't have time in 20 minutes to talk about what all these people said. So, we're only really going to focus on the statements of 3 of them. And during this, and the other two, either they said very little or they reiterated what the others have already said. So the Kitab Aqdas in Arabic literally means the most holy book. And as it's no surprise, it is one of the primary books of scripture for the Baha'i faith. Now, near the end of that book, there's a statement about auxiliary languages, or about a global language, let's call it that. And I'm not going to read all of the stuff on the slides, you'll be able to see it later, but I'm going to read the whole face. And it says, select ye a single language for the use of all on earth, and adopt ye likewise a common script. Then it goes on, this will be the cause of unity, and the greatest instrument for promoting harmony and civilization. Well, Baha'is are all for promoting harmony and civilization, and Baha'u'llah has essentially instructed the Baha'is and everyone in the world to someday adopt a common language. And this is the root, this is the root source of the belief of a future global language in the Baha'i faith. It's one of the principles that everybody who is beginning to learn about the Baha'i faith cares about. I don't think you will meet a Baha'i who does not know this. They might not know any more than this, but they'll know at least this bit. So now you're all wondering, oh man, this is cool. There's a scripturally motivated auxiliary language. And here we're at a conference of commentators. And people are like moving, saying, what is the language? We want to know. But the answer is it hasn't been selected yet. So I can't tell you. Otherwise, this would be a very different talk. But what I can talk about is that there are other statements about the nature of the language that can narrow it down for what it's going to be like. And that's what we're going to focus on. So, the excerpt that I saw before, a little bit of it says, select ye a single language for the use of all on earth and adopt ye a common script. And that's the basic sentence. But that could be the selection of the existing natural language. It doesn't say create a language. It says select a language. It could be an existing natural language, or it could be the creation of a new auxiliary language, or an existing auxiliary language. Anything, as long as it's agreed to and spoken globally. So, some Baha'is wonder, maybe it's a Natling. Baha'u'llah said, well, if look at what has Baha'u'llah said about the nature of this language? What's important? What are the attributes that are important? And what he said is, that which is desired of a language is that it convey the intent of the speaker. And he was talking to a Persian man who was promoting Persian as being superior to Arabic for writing religious tablets. And Baha'u'llah said, either one's fine. You know, either Arabic or Persian can serve the purpose. And he goes, well, wait a minute. All it has to do is convey the intent of the speaker to someone else who already knows the language. Well, any Natling serves that purpose. I mean, it doesn't matter. You could be speaking Vietnamese or English or Swahili, and if you're in that language community, that would work. So that sort of leaves it open a lot. And so some Baha'is have been looking through, over the years, looking at the scripts and said, maybe the language to be selected will be Arabic. And the reason, one of the reasons, is that Baha'u'llah wrote much of what he wrote in Arabic, as well as his predecessor, the Bab, and in one of his tablets called the Nafahat al-Quds, which has not been translated in English, he praised Arabic. He said it's one of the most expressive and eloquent languages. And having studied classes of Arabic, I find it to be very expressive and eloquent. Not that my personal opinion means anything, but I find that there are all sorts of nuances of meaning available because of its triliteral representation and how you can create all these derived word forms. But it doesn't go on and say, so it really ought to be Arabic. In fact, it very explicitly says that he's leaving the choice to the appropriate institution. He chooses not to choose a language. Well, other Baha'is, especially if you look at Baha'i internet groups, who talk about this, they think it's going to be English. They say, well, English is the de facto auxiliary language around the world, but it's mostly because, I think mainly because of economic reasons, because of the hegemony of the United States, which is dominating the economy of the world. There's a lot of motivation for people to learn some English because it helps in commerce. Also, Baha'i Saint Shoghi Effendi wrote the majority of his works in English. The rest were in Persian. At the time he was at the faith, the Baha'i faith was growing very much in North and South America and Europe. And it was a lot easier for him to communicate to people in English, which they often knew, than Persian, which they usually didn't. However, there are no scriptural references to English anywhere. And that tends to put a damper on this idea. Well, the third idea is that some Baha'is have talked about Esperanto. They say, well, maybe the Baha'i auxiliary language would be Esperanto. It's the most common auxlang in use today. Well, it turns out that many Baha'is became Esperantists in the years between World War I and II, and some decades afterward, and they worked toward the adoption of Esperanto as an official international auxiliary language. And they were writing letters to the United Nations saying, you should adopt Esperanto as the official language of the United Nations. And they were also writing letters to the Baha'i House of Justice, which had been elected in 1963, saying, you should designate Esperanto as the language we're going to use. Well, it gets even more complicated because Lydia Zamenhof, who is the daughter of Ludovic Zamenhof, the creator of Esperanto, she became a Baha'i somewhere around 1926. Well, she ended up getting sort of pulled in two directions. A lot of Baha'is hoped that Lydia would become a spokeswoman to promote the Baha'i faith among the Esperantists. And the Esperantists hoped that she would promote the language among the Baha'is. And neither one was really happy with whatever she was doing that wasn't what they wanted. So she felt that she was being pulled in two directions. She maintained her connections with the Esperantists. She maintained her connections with the Baha'i faith. But there wasn't a lot of extra growth because of this. Well, Abdul Baha, near the end of his life, took some trips to Europe and to the United States and Canada, and people asked him about Esperanto. This was in the 1920s. And what he said is, boldface, no one person can construct a universal language. It must be made by a council representing all the countries. It must contain words from different languages. And he got more specific in a separate speech where people were pushing him about it, and he says, well, Esperanto's pretty good, but it needs perfecting. It's really difficult for some people. And he almost always said just positive things. So when he said that something needed perfecting, he was really sort of putting a damper on it. He was more or less saying the idea of creating an auxiliary language is great. This one isn't ready yet. So, what are we going to do? What do the Baha'is do? Well, let's go back to that quote that he just said. He says, the universal language must be made by a council representing all countries. It must contain words from different languages. It will be governed by the simplest rules. There will be no exceptions. There will be no gender. There will be no extra or silent letters. Well, that is not what Arabic is. Neither English nor Persian reads that. So none of those ideas are going to fly because Abdu'l-Baha has really sort of narrowed it down so much. In fact, that to me sounds exactly like an oxlang. It's regular. It's phonetically spelled. There's no gender. Wow, I can think of a bunch of Aughts things that are sort of like that. But we aren't going to talk about them. So, in the 60s and 70s, maybe some of the 80s, people asked the Universal House of Justice what it thought about Esperanto, because now it was the administrative head of the faith. And they more or less said, it's not time yet. The quote says, it's not yet time for the House of Justice to make a pronouncement in favor of any particular language. Because they were getting a lot of letters from Baha'i saying, can you name Esperanto now? Is it ready now? What about Egypt? Or Uzbek? Or maybe even Sambasa? But no, what happened is every time that they wrote a letter asking the House of Justice to designate Esperanto as the official Baha'i language to become the global international language, the answer is always been, it is not timely. So, in fact, if you remember all the quotes, it said in the Kitab Akdas, the most holy book of the Baha'i faith, that the selection is going to be made by the parliaments of the world, the governments of the legal sovereign nations of the world. It's not the Baha'i House of Justice. I mean, why are they even writing to the House of Justice? Because that's not that's not who the Holocaust said would make the choice. It's really some sort of future United Nations, maybe with a little bit more oomph in its governmental structure that will one day make this choice. And they'll make the choice, I think, because of economic unity and peace. I mean, a lot of what Auxlanders think is, if I create a better language, it will create peace and harmony in the world. And I think if you look through the Baha'i writings, what they really say is, after we get peace and harmony and unity in the world, people will realize the advantages of an international language. Just like we have a European currency now, because it's advantageous and beneficial to the people who live in Europe. Someday, when there's a lot more economic cooperation, and people are using diplomacy instead of guns and bombs, they'll wake up and say, gee, it would be really nice if we could talk to each other. And that is the point where the governments of the world will start working on some sort of global language. Now, if you're a Baha'i, you believe that this is going to happen because it's in the scriptures. We just don't know when. So, the Universal House of Justice has said that this is going to happen in 2 stages. The first stage is the selection of an auxiliary language that will be auxiliary to all the natural languages that people already speak. The second stage, in the far distant future, we will eventually migrate to a single language for the entire world. So that's what the scriptures say. The other languages will still exist, but they'll sort of exist like Sanskrit or classical Greek and be objects of study by scholars. So here's a diagram of the process. This is what we look like today. We've got a whole lot of natural languages throughout the world. When the world is ready, and I'm thinking that will be maybe about the time that for those who are young, when your grandchildren are grandparents, maybe the world will be ready. We'll end up with the adoption by some future United Nations of an international auxiliary language. And then, after many, many years, centuries, there will be a single world language. The rest will exist in a historical format.